Depression Grace caused flooding overnight in areas already hard hit by Saturday's earthquake. The storm ruined some of the temporary shelters that were set up for those without homes. Now, this comes after rescue teams spent yesterday digging through the rubble, searching for anyone that still could be trapped underneath. More than 1,400 people were killed and thousands more were hurt in the country's deadliest quake since 2010. Vladimir Duthiers is in the capital with more on the story. Vlad, it's the last thing they need there. What is the situation today?
In the hard-hit town of Lekki, these white tents serve as makeshift triage units for some of those injured in the wreckage. The agony of those being treated is painted on their faces. The small hospitals there can barely take in more patients. For those suffering the most serious injuries, a trip to bigger hospitals like Hôpital d'Adventiste d'Haïti in Port-au-Prince is necessary. Medical Director Scott Nelson has been working here since 2010's earthquake.
We have many people that are in the emergency room on the floor and outside for lack of more space.
What kind of injuries are you seeing from these earthquake victims?
With earthquakes, every type of orthopedic injury is produced, and many of these are crush injuries, severe open fractures.
Dr. Nelson took us to the operating room as a patient was undergoing surgery.
Most of these patients have had walls fall on them, sometimes ceilings fall on them. We've had a few jumping injuries, even some that came from close by here where the earthquake wasn't so strong. People jump off of a balcony and have lower extremity fractures from that.
Inside the ward, it's a race to keep up with the massive influx of patients.
Just 3 days ago, this wing was under construction and it was empty. Now, there's not an empty bed in the entire ward. They've seen over 100 patients in just the last 48 hours.
She has a femur fracture here on the right side and another femur fracture on the left side.
Both of Carlin Bernard's femurs snapped in half as she tried to escape a crumbling market. Hers is just one of thousands of harrowing stories from patients suffering this tragedy.
She could feel the earth shaking and she started to run. And as she started to run, she was hit by falling debris. And there was a man that was next to her.
Anton Crowley here.
More than 1,400. And turning now to the coronavirus pandemic and political instability. Tropical depression Grace drenched the island Monday after an extremely powerful earthquake ravaged the region on Saturday. More than 1,400 people are now confirmed dead and 6,000 are injured. Hospitals in the West are reportedly overwhelmed with patients being treated in stairwells, patios, and hallways. For more on this, let's bring in CBSN anchor Vlad Duthiers, who's in Port-au-Prince. Good morning, Vlad. Let us know. And we can see behind you, Vlad, gray skies. It looks like it's very damp. How did Tropical Storm Grace end up impacting some of the rescue efforts yesterday? Where an earthquake Saturday killed hundreds of people. Vlad is reporting from the capital, Port-au-Prince.
Emergency here. A nation crushed under the weight of yet another natural disaster. Hospitals are overwhelmed by incoming patients as rescue workers search for survivors under mounds of concrete and debris. In the destruction,
there are brief moments of hope, like this woman and a young boy being rescued from the rubble of a toppled building. The epicenter of the 7.2 magnitude quake is about 80 miles west of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The coastal town of Lekki was one of the hardest hit, and its hospital is at capacity. A private plane is flying patients to Port-au-Prince. It's a striking blow for a country that still hasn't fully recovered from a series of natural disasters. A devastating earthquake hit in 2010, where an estimated 300,000 were killed. I spent nearly a month reporting from Haiti immediately after and witnessed the horror that Haitians face.
We need more people down here.
C'est où ta maison? In 2016, we came back after Hurricane Matthew leveled towns along the coast.
We understand the dire situation we are in, but the most important thing is we will come out of it.
Rashid Edmond is Haiti's ambassador to the U.S. He says the rebuilding effort will be an arduous one, especially after the assassination of Haiti's president Jovenel Moïse last month led to even more instability. But he says Haiti's interim government needs to step up and rebuild a stronger nation.
We cannot avoid any earthquake, but at least when the earthquake comes, there will be better resistance of those buildings and every other infrastructure. So they won't collapse like a house of cards.
Another saying in Haiti is emblazoned on the national flag, and it embodies what Haiti has stood for since it became the first black things that Team Rubicon has done on the ground many, many times subsequent to the 2010 earthquake in Haiti is deploy not only experts like yourself, but also teams of doctors, of nurses, of medical professionals. One of the things that we know in Haiti is that where this earthquake took place, the epicenter in Jérémie and Les Cayes, is quite a distance away from Port-au-Prince, about 90 miles, but the roads are impassable. There's either banditry on the roads or they're not passable because of the earthquake, mudslides, and rocks and debris that have fallen on the roads. So how critical is it for you to get your team of doctors into the epicenter?
Absolutely. We're primarily looking at air transportation. The important thing is after you leave a disaster, you need to keep those relationships alive so that when you come back to that country, you have a good network. We have a good, solid network between partners here and the local populace. And so we have an option, and we'll be in Les Cayes today.
So the doctors and the nurses and the medical professionals that you have with you, what are they prepared to do? What kind of medical equipment are you bringing? And ultimately, you're going to do a lot of treatment. It's given you a good sense of what you think is going to be critical and job number one once you get on the ground there.
Yeah, our main challenge as a humanitarian organization, first, we're looking to apply where there's the greatest need. And it's finding that balance between those population centers where you can have a building with many stories, with those kind of unheard of small local towns that have people with just as much need where it's maybe not getting the same attention. So finding that balance is critical early on and making sure we get to those patients quickly.
How difficult is it for you also when you're, during the 2010 earthquake, one of the things that I saw is there were a lot of people that came to Haiti to help, and it was welcomed, but sometimes there can be cross purposes because the humanitarian rescue teams are sometimes better equipped than some of the Haitian hospitals. So how do you deal with some of the traditions? How do you deal with the local population so that they know that you're all on the same page or on the same team?
For one, we look to integrate with them, right? There is an existing healthcare system here in Haiti. You can criticize it, but those medical providers know part of a bigger effort. It's not just about Team Rubicon.
So Team Rubicon, and for our audience who doesn't know, Team Rubicon was born in the wake of the 2010 earthquake. Just give us a sense of the origin story. Jake Wood, who's a former United States Marine,
yes,
he came out to Haiti in 2010 to help, and what he saw and compelled him to create and launch Team Rubicon.
Yeah, obviously after the 2010 earthquake, the scale of devastation here was great, and 8 people raised their hand. They knew they weren't part of any existing organization, but they knew they
Is the U.S. stock market overvalued and
everything they need?
It's going to be very, very difficult going forward.
And anger is growing at the slow pace of rescue and recovery efforts. Vladimir Duthier flew into areas destroyed in the disaster, and he joins us now from Port-au-Prince. Vlad, good morning.
Laura, good morning. The crumbled buildings and the shattered lives seem endless. The devastation surrounded us. Homes and businesses unrecognizable to those who call this city home.
I'm standing atop what used to be a 4-story hotel. On Saturday, when the earthquake struck, multiple people were crushed and killed, including a former Haitian senator. And that's the thing about earthquakes. They don't discriminate.
About 10 miles from Lakai sits the small village of Manish, where the damage was even more profound, made even worse by the battering rain from Tropical Depression Grace. Driving through the town, we saw hundreds of villagers roaming outside without a place to call home. This car was completely flattened when this house collapsed, essentially pancaking it. Across the street here, this Catholic church has stood in Manish for over 100 years. It's been utterly destroyed, and now, due to the aftershocks, there's a real fear that this tower could come crashing down and hurt more people. For those already injured, help is a world away. We showed you how victims of the earthquake are being ferried to hospitals in Port-au-Prince. Here's why. This is what's left of the only hospital in Manish. The town's mayor, David Brina, says about 98% of Manish was destroyed. They need water and they need food.
Et nous besoin également assistance sanitaire.
And they need attention to them. They feel left behind. They feel as if no one is coming for them. The damage was amplified in the smaller towns. They don't have the capabilities often of getting to the remote villages because they're either cut off because of swollen rivers or because they just can't get to them. They are deep and remote in the mountains. And so it was striking to talk to some of the townsfolk in Manish who talked about their situation being really, really urgent, Laura, but that the situation of their neighbors in the mountains being dire. And I found that to be absolutely heartbreaking to know that there are some people who receive medical care after a family member many Haitians, not just here, but the diaspora in nobody could do while we were there is put some caution tape around the structure and hope that nobody finds themselves very close to it, because there are still aftershocks occurring, and any he has vowed to step up the rescue and recovery operations. We're now at the point, Laura, where, under the conditions that we witnessed back in 2010, when there were many organizations that were here trying to rescue folks trapped in the rubble. My suspicion is now, 4 days on from the earthquake, without the massive response that we saw back in 2010, because the damage here is further afield and it's more spread out. And so it's going to be very difficult going forward. We are going to embed today and over the course of the next couple of days with a couple of aid groups, including MSF, and hopefully we'll get to see what work that they do, which brings some relief to folks, and we'll probably report that back to you tomorrow morning.
Well, we are looking forward to that report.
Pode, já tá aí, Westmore da